특히 꼭 알려주세요.
원래 돈을 받고 인식을 해줘요.
힘들게 행복하지 않아.
HIV는 예방이 가능합니다.
장난해? 다신 그러지 마라. 커피 줄까? 언제 일어났어?
HIV 검진으로 일상을 회복하세요.
좋아요.
구독.
부탁드립니다.
많이 시청해주세요.
이렇게 꼭 알려주세요.
원래 돈을 받고 행시를 해줘요.
호기기게 행복하지 않아?
HIV는 예방이 가능합니다.
장난해? 다신 그러지 마라. 커피 줄까? 언제 일어났어?
HIV 검진으로 일상을 회복하세요.
좋아요.
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 구독.
부탁드립니다.
많이 시청해주세요.
이렇게 꼭 알려주세요.
원래 돈을 받고 행시를 해줘요.
호기기게 행복하지 않아?
HIV는 예방이 가능합니다.
장난해? 다신 그러지 마라. 커피 줄까? 언제 일어났어?
HIV 검진으로 일상을 회복하세요.
좋아요. 구독.
부탁드립니다.
많이 시청해주세요.
Yes, I can. I don't know it exactly by heart, so I will read it out. It's Article 1 of the Constitution of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Article 1. All persons in the Netherlands shall be treated equally in equal circumstances. Discrimination on the grounds of religion, belief, political opinion, race or sex, or any other grounds whatsoever shall not be permitted. That's the Article 1 of our Constitution in the Netherlands right now.
Yes, read the article number 1. Everyone has the right to the recognition of their gender identity, to the free development of their person according to their gender identity, to be treated accordingly to their gender identity, and in particular, to be identified in this way by the instruments that prove their identity with respect to their first name, photo, image, and sex which they are registered.
Whoever publicly or with intent to distribute in a wider circle presents a proclamation or some other message by which a group of persons is threatened, mocked, or degraded because of its race, skin color, national or ethnic origin, faith or sexual orientation is to be punished with fine or prison up to 2 years. In determining the punishment, it shall be considered an aggravation factor if the act has characteristics of propaganda. The second act on prohibition against discrimination is in the labor market. Discrimination because of race, skin color, religion or faith, political opinion, sexual orientation, age, handicap, or national, social or ethnic origin. As you can see, the difference is that the prohibition against discrimination of the labor market includes more minorities than the other acts. If just to mention them, this time we also get political opinion, age, handicap, and the social origin into play. And I think that is very important.
The Mexican Constitution, in its first article, expressly prohibits discrimination on the grounds of, and I read, ethnicity, gender, age, disabilities, religion, opinions, sexual preferences, or any other reason that violates the human dignity.
The Charter guarantees the right to the equal benefit and protection of the law without discrimination, and in particular, without discrimination on the basis of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. The Human Rights Act explicitly prohibits discrimination, and that's discrimination based on the grounds of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, marital status, family status, disability, genetic characteristics, and conviction for an offense for which a pardon has already been granted.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Julián Canessa, the head of the political section at the Embassy of Argentina in Korea.
My name is Ejner Jensen, and I'm the Danish ambassador to Korea. I've been here since September 2019, and I love to be in your country.
Hello, hola everyone. My name is Bruno Figueroa, and I am the ambassador of Mexico in Korea. Yorobun annyeonghaseyo. It is an honor for me and for the Embassy of Mexico to take part in the Seoul Queer Cultural Festival 2021.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Alina Kwan, and I am the Second Secretary at the Embassy of Canada in Korea.
Yes, my name is Joanna Doornwaard. Let me take off the mask. My name is Joanna Doornwaard. I'm the ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Korea.
안녕하세요. My name is Juana. My name is Kay. We're a married couple living in Malmö, Sweden. And we're here to talk a little about living as an LGBT couple in Sweden and in South Korea too.
My name is Frode Solberg. I'm the Norwegian ambassador to the Republic of Korea.
Yes, basically the laws are put in place to protect minorities, be it related to hate speech, religious majorities, sexual orientation, age, or whatever. We're out there to protect the minorities. And discriminatory actions based on sexual orientation, skin color, and so on are simply not accepted in Denmark. And we want to protect our minorities. That's why we have the legislation.
Yes, it's from the Constitution, and to implement that Constitution we have a series of laws that apply to implement that. So we have international treaties, we have EU regulations, but the most important one is the Equal Treatment Law that implements this constitutional article. And that's a bill that the sole purpose of that is the prohibition of any kind of discrimination, including based on sexual orientation.
During at least the last 20 years, Mexico had put in place a variety of programs and actions to strengthen the protection of rights and fundamental freedoms of all citizens. Our main goal is to make diversity a value rather than an unjustified ground for segregation. In August of 2001, we had a series of constitutional reforms that conferred constitutional status to the illegality of discrimination.
So it's really important, and well, this idea is to end discrimination and to extend more rights to the society. That's the purpose of the law. Well, that's
better, I'd say. Yeah, but we do have some anti-discrimination laws in Sweden. So I did some research about it because Sweden is not my birth country, so I had to do some research about it. So some of the anti-discrimination laws is included in employment, which is since '87, and then also in the provision of goods and services, and that also started from same year. And also anti-discrimination laws in all other kind of areas. So that includes indirect discrimination, hate speech. So that's since '87 for sexual orientation and since 2019 for transgender identity. And also concerning gender identity since 2009. And we even have like hate crime law includes sexual orientation and gender identity since 2010 for sexual orientation and since 2018 for transgender identity. So, well, it's not a perfect law, I would say. I mean,
yeah, the Equal Marriage Law, number 26618, is a landmark in the national law of Argentina, and it's a law which was passed back in 2010 in July. So it's 10 years old, or almost 11, but still 10 years old. And of course, this law had a lot of controversy around. Many people were against, but many people more were supporting this. This law, so far in this decade, 20,000 marriage or couples got married of the same sex. So it shows that the law needed to be passed because there was a minority that without rights that were asking for that. But how can we have such a law? It happens like at once? Of course not. We have to go back to 1990, where the first movements tried to fight to get like a marriage for the same sex, and they were unsuccessful during an entire decade. But only in 2002, in the city of Buenos Aires, passed a law saying that it was allowed what we will call like civil unions. Civil unions, it was a way to give some of the rights, but you cannot get all the same rights that like a couple could have by the law of marriage. So, the community felt that it was not enough because the discrimination was still in place, because I could get some of the rights but not all the rights. So they continue working, pushing with the political parties and also the movements organized better. And they pursue to include this civil union to have more rights. Okay, that the Congress did not allow. So it was like some years that no improvement was made. There was like 20 years of work of the people asking for the rights, civil associations working together, trying to prepare a draft of laws that were presented to the Congress to get no results at the time. So it's a very long work, heavy work done, but eventually now we have the law, and Argentina was the first country in Latin America to have an equal marriage law. So that's a very important thing that we are all very happy about. Thank you.
It is important to remember a historical background that from the Mexican independence to the last decade of the 20th century, a systematic and institutional form of discrimination existed in Mexico, mainly but not only against our indigenous people, because of the colonial process that my country experienced for 3 centuries. Because of that process, after our independence, 2 centuries ago exactly this year, the basic rights of indigenous communities in Mexico were systematically violated. At the same time, this racism and discrimination entrenched in our society made other minority groups, such as the members of the LGBT+ community, vulnerable to discrimination. After a long reflection, a long process of self-reflection, the Mexican society resolved to recognize that our country is a multicultural nation and that our diversity must be a source of strength and cultural richness rather than division. Our country is incomplete when someone is left aside, and therefore one of the main goals of the Mexican government currently is to guarantee the respect to human dignity and access to the equal rights for all our citizens.
So the constitutional prohibition asked for an implementation by law. And I think it's very important to say that it does not explicitly mention discrimination based on sexuality or ethnicity, and that was the criticism at that time. But in 1994, so we had this equal treatment law that was adopted, and it clarified different types of discriminatory behavior that were banned. It clarified additional prohibited grounds for discrimination: sexuality, nationality, marital status, pregnancy. And it also installed a commission for equal treatment, for extra protection. So if you feel discriminated, there's a commission where you can go to.
The bill actually stems all the way back from 1939, and it was actually the intention, to protect the Danish Jews when during the Nazi uprising in Europe. So that's where it all started, and since then we have had 3 amendments of the law. The first amendment came around in 1971. The Parliament voted to change the wording to include the UN Convention on the removal of discrimination on the basis of race, skin color, and descent of origin. The second amendment came in 1987, and it was amended to include sexual orientation. It was just 2 years before Denmark granted legal recognitions of same-sex registered partnership. And the final amendment came in 1995, and that was the aggravating factor for propaganda when it was included.
The anti-discrimination law in Mexico was the result of the advocacy of many citizens and multiple NGOs who were encouraged by the political transition that Mexico lived in the early year 2000. A group of citizens launched a movement against discrimination and in favor of equality, that was its name, and subsequently they were invited by the Mexican government to create a citizens commission against discrimination, and they tasked that commission to prepare an assessment about discrimination and propose the first draft of the law.
There was a general support for laws that aimed at non-discrimination and equal treatment. So it's really about the Netherlands. We consider everybody is equal for the law, and that's a general understanding that everybody accepts in the Netherlands. So a discussion about constitutional prohibition of discrimination started after the Second World War, when international human rights treaties were adopted. And also the Equal Treatment Act enjoyed broad support, including from religious parties in parliament. So in the Netherlands it was not such as much as an LGBT issue as an issue of the rule of law, that everybody was equal for the law. So in general you can say there was a broad political consensus that in a constitutional democracy people are equal before the law.
Yes, as you probably know, we experienced this AIDS, HIV, epidemic in the 1980s and 90s. And I think back then all of us probably remember that the homosexual community was ostracized and had difficult times. So I think Denmark chose to go against that current and to include in a legal sense and show support for especially the homosexual community with our legislation and amendments of the bill. I guess it also relates to the current pandemic. We have seen some places in the world that people are having, or minorities are having difficult times due to being sort of blamed for spreading the disease and so on. And this is of course not acceptable. No one minority should be blamed for anything. This is a common task that we need to deal with, all of us, jointly. I think there was some specifics to it, because if you go back in the 60s and 70s, there was a movement or uprising from young people in Denmark against the bourgeoisie and the conservative way of thinking. And that uprising, I think, has been very helpful in the thinking and actually changing of our laws. So the first amendment that I spoke about before was in 1971. So that whole movement simply gave a push, I believe, and it continued to give a push, so it also helped with the movement change of the legislation in 1987. Now today, these young people, they've had children, they've grown up, they're part of our society, and I think that this sort of free way of thinking, inclusiveness and so on, is something that is very common to Danish way of living and thinking, and we're actually quite proud of it.
So of course there were many issues also in the Netherlands that people disagreed on. There were discussions on certain aspects of the equal treatment law. For instance, the balance between freedom of religion and the ban on discrimination. Can Christian schools refuse to hire gay teachers? Another issue, can civil servants refuse to marry gay couples? Those were discussions that it's ongoing discussions. So over the time you can see that we really specified more the areas for prohibition of discrimination. So it's an ongoing process, but it starts with the fact that everybody is equal for the law. Well, I mean, discussions are still ongoing. We are not there yet, but at least the discussions are taking place. And for our government, it's very important that everybody feels safe to live in the Netherlands. Doesn't matter how you are, who you love. And we really support a lot of, the government supports a lot of initiatives from the communities. Like the COC, that's our the organization in the Netherlands. I think it's the oldest LGBT advocacy group in the world. And they have programs. So I think since 2012, our secondary schools have a program where that's about equality. And this part of the program is being given by them, developed by them. So it's really to stress everybody that there's there's a program at the schools that include gender and sexual diversity in their curriculum since 2012. So our youngsters are also aware of equality.
That's wonderful.
If they were not aware yet, but I mean that it's stressed as well at school. And then of course we have community networks that are supported by the government. So there's especially right now groups like the LGBT, the Foundation for Queer Muslims, Christian LGBTI network groups. So they are vulnerable, so they get extra support from our government, those groups. So yeah, that's ongoing still.
Well, in Denmark, like many other countries, I think there was a heated debate on, before we actually got to where we are today. And back in 1985, the National Association of LGBT people in Denmark communicated with Parliament and had good discussions, raising perspectives on how to amend the anti-discrimination paragraph to include homosexual people. And they argued, among other things, that amending the law could ensure legal security for homosexual people. LGBT Denmark are still working together with government and bringing about, possible changes and awareness on the LGBT plus community for them to get the same recognitions as was given to homosexuals. As a whole, we as a society are constantly learning and from the debate and that we have, and that's how it should be for us to involve in the right direction. And that is precisely why the bills were amended several times. We are proud that it could happen and that we have the support from our parliament to make these changes.
Well, the process to get a law against discrimination and pass it through the Mexican legislative bodies was not an easy one, of course. First, you can imagine that reaching a consensus on the diagnosis, the regulatory framework, and public policies to combat discrimination implied a long and sometimes a troubled course. Despite these setbacks, the process was highly successful, and I would like to underline that only 2 years passed between the reform of the first Article 1 of our Constitution and the enactment of our law. 2 years is very quick when we're talking about such an important and profound legislation. But it was very successful because it was a citizens' effort in favor of society. It was a bottom-up initiative, but which had at the same time the support from the government. And it was not an imposition of guidelines either from a political group or from the government by itself. The most important factor was at the time that most of the stakeholders seemed to agree on the fundamental principle that discrimination should have to be outlawed. Based on that minimal common sense coincidence, the law to prevent and eliminate discrimination was drafted. Unquestionably, the first law was not a perfect text, and in fact, many individuals and organizations were not happy with the first decree because they considered that some provisions were ambiguous or lenient. However, despite its flaws, the law became a historical achievement and a major development in the fight for a more egalitarian society. Thankfully, the text has been improved throughout the years. The definition of discrimination contained in the law had been broadened, and the work of the Mexican Discrimination Prevention Agency had been strengthened with powers to prevent and eliminate hate speech.
Not really fall back. I think it's something in developing still. The situation is still not perfect in the Netherlands, and we see, also there at school sometimes there's bullying and all that, but there are institutions. It's very easy to go to a committee or wherever to complain that you feel discriminated. So, and then action can be taken. So, society is aware. And it will not go away, but I mean, it's an ongoing process.
Well, as you mentioned, it's actually difficult to draw a line. When does a comment go from annoying to taunting or threatening or degrading? That's the whole question, I guess. And then Denmark takes great pride in ensuring that freedom of speech is there for everybody, and actually it's precisely, the freedom of speech has been used by many to oppose the anti-discrimination law, and I think we've been lucky that anti-discrimination law still stands. We had back in 2011, 10 years ago, the Danish People's Party proposing to remove the anti-discrimination law. But a great minority, or great majority in our parliament voted to keep it, and that's why we still have it today, and we are proud to have it. I would also say that among the general public, among the politicians and so on, there's a general feeling that nobody should be, threatened due to minority or being in a minority group, whatsoever it might be, and that's why we need to protect everybody.
Well, there was not opposition against the legislation as such, but some wanted specific exceptions, for example, for religious schools or religious civil servants. For example, the Christian schools, they cannot refuse to hire gay teachers, but they can require teachers to support principles of the school. And in 2001, the Netherlands legalized gay marriages, but some civil servants, conscious objectors, due to religious beliefs. But the Netherlands law right now requires government personnel to carry out law without prejudice. So that was quite a dilemma. And initially, so yes, indeed, the civil servants allowed to refuse based on religious beliefs were provided by the municipality, and the municipality would ensure that another civil servant would take over that would not have that kind of objections. But since 2014, newly hired civil servants are not allowed to refuse anymore. I mean, if you're a civil servant, you cannot prejudice against who you have in front of you, so you have to comply. And these discussions did not end after adoption of the law. In the Netherlands, we have long debates on the balance between the different freedoms. So freedom of religion, especially, and the freedom of expression, and the freedom to be whoever you want to be. And that's part of democracy, and that's an open society, so you talk about that. And of course, that's an ongoing process.
As I mentioned before, the law was achieved thanks to the momentum created by the year 2000 political transition in Mexico, and consequently, it did not experience major opposition from political and social groups, even from conservative political parties. On the contrary, many felt that the text needed to be stronger and have a wider scope for the protection of minorities. The government that won the elections in the year 2000 was precisely conservative, but open enough to support this important transformation for the Mexican society.
So, as I mentioned, the COC, that's a very, one of the oldest, or the oldest LGBTI advocacy group in the world. They played a big role in the Netherlands, and still. And civil society, they are very, so it's not a defining moment, but it's an ongoing process. And there's still, together, the civil society that can be very diverse, but they influence, they have a part to play in the democracy in the Netherlands, as the Netherlands, yeah. So as I mentioned, it was really an equal issue, the equal rights issue that for us stands out. So understanding that in a free society, being different than others should not lead to unfair or unequal treatment. And this is not just a law that protects minorities, it protects everybody in the Netherlands from arbitrary, unequal and unfair discrimination. I think, and that's something that's accepted by everybody. I think, I mean, the Dutch public or the Dutch population in general, they accepted this general rule of equality. And then from there, because that's a gradual process, and then it was also logical, okay, if the gay people want to marry, I mean, we're equal, so why not? So, I mean, all these things develop over time, so it's not one big legislation and everybody is, I mean, it's a gradual process, and it takes time and a lot of discussion.
Like for example, LGBT couples can actually get married and adopt, and lesbian couples have access to IVF and assisted insemination. And the Church of Sweden, they actually bless people to get married, even though they are same-sex couples or not. And the Church of Sweden is the largest Lutheran denomination in Europe and the third largest in the world. So imagine that kind of church power to protect people like us. I mean, because I identify myself as Christian as well, so that's really a huge win for me, because it's just like it justifies me, you know, my being, and actually, if you remember, there were a few times that pastors at this church were fired because these pastors refused to, you know, to perform a same-sex marriage. So yeah, that's really great.
It's a general opinion, you could say, if you
like don't count about laws. The culture is pretty good here, I say. There are a few instances where discrimination happened, and of course we always need to look at it seriously. But the general opinion and the general, let's say, feel about it is that it should be accepted and it should be embraced. So a person who would actually go against that, to be kind of discriminatory or like hate speech or anything, would be kind of shunned by the majority of the society in general. In general, I'd say. Which is good. It's great. Well, I mean, the important step was indeed that the gay marriages in 2001. Recently, we celebrated the 20 years anniversary of that law. And I think we are very proud of that. At that time, the first time, there were 4 couples that were married, 3 male and 1 female, and they're still together. I mean, after 20 years, and they're happy. So, and right now, I mean, of course, it's ongoing, but the first four couples. So I think that was a milestone for the Netherlands, and that's something that we are proud of.
Have concrete information that allows us to identify the groups of society mostly impacted by discriminatory practices. One of the main tools we have in Mexico to measure our progress and setbacks is the National Survey on Discrimination, conducted periodically by our National Council to Prevent Discrimination, CONAPRED, as I mentioned its name in Spanish. The National Survey measures the perceptions on discrimination held by the general population in Mexico and by the several groups that live under circumstances of vulnerability to discrimination. That is women, children, the LGBT plus community, youngsters, elders, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, people with disabilities, immigrants, and domestic helpers. The information provided by the survey is very useful to harmonize the relation between needs and laws, and to mainstream an anti-discrimination perspective in public institutions and their policies, guaranteeing access to justice for those who suffer discrimination. These actions have transformed our culture, society, and policies to make the respect for diversity an established principle, seeking to seize the denial or conditioning of rights to the extent possible. The change in our paradigm towards discrimination assisted in spreading a culture of non-discrimination in Mexico. And this is important to observe. CONAPRED today is one of the first 7 institutions in Mexico most trusted by citizens in only a few years. In addition to the work made at the national scale, every state in Mexico has established anti-discrimination agencies to deal with cases of discrimination and segregation. Likewise, more civil society organizations have joined this work.
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, so there was more legislation added since 1994. So, as I mentioned already, the prohibition to refuse marrying LGBTI people or couples in 2014. And then also a recent, or quite recent example is the Transgender Persons Act that entered into force in 2014. So that made it easier administratively and legally for a person to change their registered gender. As soon as this simplification was introduced, there was a substantial increase in the number of people applying to change their birth certificate. And as I mentioned, no one law will end the debate or resolve a difficult situation entirely, and it will likely lead to more discussions, but you have to be open to hear that and to find a solution together. And that's the process of an open society and a democratic society, I think.
So Canada recognizes that diversity is a source of strength, and we champion inclusive attitudes and approaches that will lead to the full inclusion and participation of all minorities based on race, religion, ethnic origin, disability status, immigration status, age, gender, and sexual orientation and identity. The Government of Canada continues to take steps to enhance the promotion and protection of human rights in our country through legislative and policy initiatives. So in recent years, we've taken action to address issues of racism and discrimination through adopting Canada's anti-racism strategy. We've adopted Canada's first ever youth policy. We have a national housing strategy as well as a poverty reduction strategy. We have adopted the Accessible Canada Act, and we have created a new Center for Gender Diversity and Inclusion Statistics. Really exciting for us is that most recently we've created an LGBTQ2 Secretariat, which is committed to promoting LGBTQ equality, LGBTQ2 rights, and addressing discrimination against those communities. The Secretariat is leading the development of our first ever federal LGBTQ2 action plan, which represents a huge milestone in advancing the rights of LGBTQ2 persons in Canada.
The government of Mexico is committed to achieve a society defined by a non-discrimination approach where all people can exercise their rights fully. Unfortunately, homophobia is still one of the most common discriminatory practices, and combating it has been a crucial task for the construction of a country of full rights and freedom for all. Disinformation is an ally of homophobia. That's why my government has established a national program for equality and non-discrimination for the years 2019-2024, whose main objective is to dismantle discriminatory practices against members of the LGBT+ community and other vulnerable groups. In May 2019, the National Discrimination Information System, or by its acronym CINDIS, was put into operation. This system is a virtual platform that gathers studies and surveys on discrimination in Mexico, whose objective is to offer information for decision-making and the formulation of policies to combat and eradicate the scourge of discrimination. There is, of course, still a lot to do. And you don't change societal patterns in just a few years, even with strong laws. And I will give you a concrete example. The Mexican Senate is currently processing a ban on the so-called conversion therapies that still some doctors practice in my country. And recently Mexico City passed a similar regulation.
Well, in Denmark, organizations are working very hard on a daily basis to ensure the rights of LGBTQ+ community, and they are focused on discussing the agenda with politicians and to make sure that we keep the rights that have been embedded in our anti-discrimination law. To give you a couple of examples, I just want to highlight a few organizations, one of them being the National Association for LGBT People called LGBT Denmark. It has actually been around since 1948, which is many years when you look at it. And they are there to ensure the rights of the LGBT community in Denmark. They advise the government, come up with ideas on how to ensure inclusiveness for the LGBT community. Another organization I would like to highlight is the Institute of Human Rights Denmark, who work on promoting and protecting human rights and equality in Denmark and in the rest of the world. It's a great organization that we are proud of having as well. A fourth or third one to highlight could be stophatecrimes.dk. It's an organization supported by the Minister of Justice, the Police of Copenhagen, and Institute of Human Rights, and it's there to focus on the agenda on highlighting problems with hate crimes and discrimination. Finally, we also have the organizations Copenhagen Pride and Pan Idræt, and I'm proud to announce that they are hosting this year's World Pride in August, and to celebrate and advocate for LGBT plus community in Denmark and worldwide. So I could say that the civil society in Denmark is actually quite active and always out there to help and assist minorities, which we are proud of.
Well, at the moment, I think the importance is these government commissions where you can go if you feel being discriminated. And in the beginning, they were like national, so it looked like, okay, there's a very big gap to the person in the street who feels discriminated and to go to this national. So right now the municipalities have committees. So at several layers, it's very accessible for people to go there to complain. I feel discriminated. And they try to solve that and all that, but at least you can announce it somewhere. You feel your rights are being threatened, then you can go somewhere. And also with bullying, programs against bullying are there as well. It's more about having discussions to be an open society where everybody can say in a normal way, okay, you don't have to agree, but at least, I mean, you're equal. It's the same with religions. I mean, of course, you don't expect that the Christian, if they don't want to marry gay couple, that's fine. But don't prevent others who want to live happily ever after to have them marry. So it's really the freedom of expression and to respect everybody as equal.
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to say to them that probably this is the right moment to continue fighting for the rights, and that never give up the dreams or what they feel. In my country, this has been a long journey. I would say that more than 30 years that the topic is on the agenda, because probably it happens since the beginning, but on the agenda it has been like 30 years so far. So I believe that there are a lot of countries that have a lot to teach or to share, and experience that can be communicate, and people can take advantage of this. So no, my warm hugs for everyone, and well, I hope you can continue making progress. I would recommend to organize very well. In Argentina, there was a very important communication between the civil associations and also the political parties, because you need the two. It's not that it will be done, let's say, alone by isolated cases. It's important again that the law should change. No? The law should be accepting these new demands from the society, and I'm sure it does, because even international law shows the right of non-discrimination is international, recognized internationally. So, well, I hope the best for everyone, and I hope to see soon in the festival, maybe.
Yes, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you for being out there fighting for equality. The embassy has participated in the festival for many years, and we are proud to be there this year as well. This year's slogan from the embassy is "Love out loud with pride," and we are happy to support you all. Thank you. 감사합니다.
It's a great honor for me to be part of the Seoul Queer Cultural Festival. On behalf of the government and people of Mexico, we would like to offer our deepest congratulations for this effort, despite all the difficulties imposed by the current situation. In Mexico, we firmly believe that democracy is an essential part of our identity, and that a democratic country cannot be built by excluding any part of its society. That is why in the year 2003, Mexico became one of the first countries of Latin America to enact anti-discrimination laws. In 2015, our Supreme Court legalized gay marriage throughout the country. By participating and supporting this event, we reiterate our commitment to human rights and to the enjoyment of these rights by our citizens, free from any discrimination. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. 정말 감사합니다.
Everyone deserves to be able to have pride in who they are and to live a true, authentic life, free from discrimination and persecution, regardless of who they love or how they identify. And together we can and we must challenge stigma, denounce prejudices, and condemn violence to build a safer, more inclusive, and more compassionate world.
Well, I think the Netherlands support you. Orange is part of the rainbow, and I really hope next year I can see you all in person.
No, but I think you make a very important point as well, that and a point that I always make as well, that it's up to each and every country to find their way, and it's not neither my job or my country's job to tell anyone else what to do, because that's a path one has to choose. But it's always, I think, in these, always when we're talking about important issues, it's nice to share experiences, and we can tell what we have done and what we have found successful, even though we have a way to go as well. But it's always nice to talk about important challenges, and this is an important challenge for the whole global society, and it needs to be addressed, and that's why I think we appreciate very much to work together.
Yes, working together is very important, and also you are. I know. I think some Korean people, not every Korean people, but some Korean people already know how much you are enthusiastic in this issue. So I think your example and your effort is already very much, important and then appreciating, I think.
As we have said before, never give up. Exactly, that's the message. Exactly. And just be true to yourself. Yeah, well done. That's basically all. And we say goodbye. Goodbye to you. Bye. Bye.